Hello, and welcome to RadioTimes.com's live Q&A with the cast and creatives behind Sky's hit series, Gangs of London. It's Sky Atlantic's most watched original show of 2020. I'm Morgan Jeffery, and tonight I'm going to be joined by two of the stars of Gangs of London, Joe Cole, who plays Sean Wallace, and Sope Dirisu, who plays Elliot Finch, plus the series co-creator, writer and director, Gareth Evans. Joe, Sope and Gareth will be answering questions sent in by fans of the show over the past week, and they join me now. Hi, guys.
Hello, Morgan.
We have been literally inundated with questions from fans. So first of all, also thank you guys for joining me. We've had an incredible response. So let's get cracking with those fan questions. First of all, the response to Gangs of London has just been phenomenal. What have you guys made of the reaction so far?
You guys go first.
You guys. Go on, Sope.
It's been really touching, actually. It's been really touching to see how many people have connected with it, how many people have reached out and spoken positively about the series so far, sharing the parts that they enjoyed. And it's been really overwhelming, actually, the amount as well. I'm not sure exactly what the figures are, but I think we were told that it was the second most popular release from Sky Atlantic in their history, which is an amazing feat that we're all very proud of. But I think we're just all really happy to be reaching as many people as we have, especially in lockdown UK.
Joe, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it's come out at a time where we've not been able to see many people. So it's difficult to gauge the reaction on the streets, but you certainly see it on social media. I suppose people can be plenty more vocal on social media, which is interesting. But it's been lovely. And the people I have seen out and about have been sort of really positive. And I think it's just something new, something fresh, and it's been great, man. Yeah.
And Gareth?
Yeah, I think it's been, not to kind of just echo what the boys have said, but it's been quite overwhelming, really. I think, for me, I've never done television before. So for me, it was always that thing of, films come out and you get that sort of dribble of responses, for the films I've made not made anything big enough for it to be boom, global all in one go yet. And so for films, like, you tend to do that thing of, like, you take your film around, you sort of, go and to different distributors in different parts of the world and do your little promo piece for them. And then you get the little echoes of how it's done in different territories. But with this, obviously, it's television and it's on a good slot, and it's with a massive network behind it and a big channel. And so then all of a sudden you get hit by this wave of reactions, really. And the fact that it's kind of, it was 3+ years of our working life, at least for myself and Matt Flannery, and the guys at Pulse. And so for us to kind of then be in a situation here where all 10 hours, all 9 episodes of it just boom right there into people's eyes, and the fact that people have been, committing and binging it in the space of like a day sometimes, like that's wild. So the fact that, 3 years of work could get just seen in a day has kind of like blown my mind, I know, for sure.
I'm watching the whole thing in a day. That sounds like an intense binge watch. But good on you if you did it. If you are just joining us, welcome to RadioTimes.com's Q&A with the cast and creatives behind Sky's hit series Gangs of London. I'm joined by cast members Joe Cole and Sope Dirisu and writer-director Gareth Evans. We had a fan question from Brazil. So clearly the show has made an impact internationally. It's a global success story. And this question's for you, Gareth. A fan says, I'm totally in love with the show. Congrats to the cast, crew, and creator. What were your inspirations for creating the plot and the characters?
So obviously, back in the day, Pulse came to me with the IP for a PSP game called Gangs of London. And back then, they had this thing of it being based on a video game. They wanted to do a film franchise out of it. And myself and Matt Flannery, who was the co-creator of the show, obviously Matt's been my cinematographer since I started doing anything. Like, we were talking way back, even back to university days when we were just making short films that no one's ever going to see. And so, we talked about it, me and him, and I guess Matt always had a writer's background as well. And I was always keen to kind of like do something with him, because every first draft of everything I'd ever written, I'd always share with him and get his opinion back on it. So on this one, I said, look, this is a massive undertaking. I think it should be a TV show. And we felt that quite strongly, because London is such a diverse city and such a, there's so many different cultures there. In order to do it justice, we didn't want to do like a film franchise where each film you get 20, 30 minutes maybe to spend with your sort of like extraneous characters, and then 90 minutes just on the A characters. And so we felt in long form TV we could explore more of the culture, we can explore more of what the city is actually like. And so that was the initial leaping off point, really. It was kind of like, in a way, pitching the project back to the guys at Pulse and saying, like, let's make it a TV, let's make it a long form narrative. And I'd had a concept way back when I was still living in Indonesia about what would be like if we did a crime show where the first episode started with the funeral of a mob boss, and that he held everything together, and then the power vacuum that would create from that. And so that idea had been sort of bubbling away in my brain for like probably about a year or two up until that point. And so I thought, oh, this would work really well here. This could fit within London, being a global city as it is. And so that was the sort of the initial starting point then.
Mm. And Gareth, in terms of working with other directors on the series, how did you go about setting the tone that you wanted for the series?
Well, it was really important to find sort of like, two directors that could kind of come onto the show and see what me and Matt were trying to do, and to take that and keep pushing it further than what we were able to do in the first step. And so, I've been a long time, friend of both Corin and Xavier's. Big fan of their work as well, big fan of the work in genre cinema. And that was something that was really important to us. We weren't, not to be sort of disparaging towards television, but our approach was to treat this like we were making 9 films, and for each one to have a certain sort of cinematic quality to it. And so, for me, it was a no-brainer to kind of like to say, like, look, I think the director for one of the blocks should be Corin. I think the other one should be Xavier. And to bring them on board, and they kind of got behind the world build of the thing. That's the one thing I really love about both of them as directors, is that they're so great at building worlds, at creating these alternate universes that feel both grounded in reality, but then also have the opportunity to go big and stretch their wings a little bit. And so, once me and Matt had kind of like done our sort of prep on the first episode, then we were able to kind of sit down with both Corin and then also sit down with Xavier and their DPs respectively. And both DPs are incredible as well. Laurent, who's Xavier's DP, and Martin, who is Corin's DP. And discuss the tone of it, the look of it, the feel of the show, and what it needed to be. What were the rules of the show? What are the things we didn't want to, veer away from? What are the things that we were going to stick quite rigidly to? And in all fairness, I thought they both did an excellent job. So yeah, very, very proud of the fact that they got to take what we set up and run with it.
Mm. Now, Joe and Sope, we've had many questions about your characters, Sean and Elliot. How you feel about your characters as well. I mean, a question from one fan was, do you see yourself at all in the characters you play in Gangs of London? And also a similar question was, what's the most and least relatable thing you share with your character?
You go first, Joe.
Cheers, mate. What I see in Sean, I mean, I guess that I'm very close to my family, and family is very important to me, and is a big part of what drives me. And I thought that was captured really well in the show. I thought the relationship with my brother and sister, and kind of up to a point, my relationship with my dad. So for me, I guess that was the biggest thing I had in common. Aside from that, probably not a great deal, to be honest. And I probably, I think that's probably a good thing.
Probably a good thing.
I suppose one of the things I really appreciated about Elliot is his ability to survive in different situations. Like his thinking really quickly on his feet, like we see in the interrogation scene in episode 1, and also being different things to different people. I suppose there is a duplicity to Elliot that I know we all experience as actors when we become different characters. And I think it was interesting to play someone who wasn't an actor, but had to use the same tools as I do in my work in his. So that's a similarity, I suppose, that we had. I also connected with his moral code, or I mean, some would say lack thereof. I think that the world is not just full of good and bad people, and that there's a blurring along the spectrum of good and evil. And I think that the journey that Elliot goes on as a character is reflective of that, to be honest.
Another quite common question among Gangs of London fans, they wanted to know what sort of prep you guys, Joe and Sope, what sort of preparation you undertook ahead of filming, whether that be any research or presumably some kind of physical training as well.
Well, I know for me, I can only speak for myself, but there was a lot of physical training. I remember when I first met Gareth, actually, for the role of Elliot, and we did the audition and we worked the scene over and over again. And he was like, right, that's great. Now you go for your fight test. And I was like, and I was walked around the building, round the back to a different building down the street. I was like, oh, what's going on here? And I was put through my paces by Jude Poyer and Chris Webb. Jude was the fight and stunt coordinator and director on the series, and Chris worked with him. Chris, for a whole month before we started principal photography, put me through my paces, teaching me the choreography of all of the fights and conditioning me so I'd be able to get through them. Because whilst they happen in 3 minutes maybe, or a bit longer on film, it definitely took us a little bit longer than that to shoot it. I think we were shooting the Cleaver fight for 4 days, is it, Gareth?
Yeah, about 3.5, yeah. Yeah, 3.5 to 4 days, yeah.
The pub sequence was a bit longer than that.
Yeah, it's 4.
I mean, like, you can see how intense the high level of intensity those fight sequences are. And Gareth does an excellent job in not shooting them all at once. He'll tell you about the process of how he captures the scenes later. But you still have to maintain that energy on camera for 3.5 or 4 days. So Chris definitely made sure my body was ready for that by putting me through my paces at the beginning of our production period.
And those fight sequences are just absolutely spectacular. And ordinarily, people would assume that there's stunt doubles and so on involved to quite a large degree. But I gather, Sope, you did a lot of those fight scenes yourself.
Well, I was desperate to, and if I could have my own way, I might not be with you here today. How dangerous some of those stunts are. It was really important for me in my process to do as much as I could, and I know that helped Gareth with the edit. If it was my face, then he had nothing he had to cut around, and he didn't have to frame things differently. But there were some stunts that were just mad. And I'm really grateful to Men's Sana Tamakloe, who played my stunt double, for moments such as when Elliot is tossed against the corner of the wall at the end of the first episode, or suplex over onto a washing machine. That level of pain, I'm sure I could imagine for my process rather than actually putting my body through it. But I am proud to say that I tried to and managed to do about 95% of the stuff we see on screen, Gareth.
Yeah, that's about right. Yeah. It was just the stuff where we were thinking we need you for the next day that we decided then let's not let you do that.
It absolutely pays off though. Those scenes are spectacular and they do have a real authenticity, I think, because of the way you guys shot them. Joe, what about you? What prep went into playing Sean Wallace?
I did a lot of prep for the shower scene in Ep 6. Yeah, I mean,
you know.
Sorry?
I thought that was Ben.
You know. I mean, obviously I have a different sort of accent and a different way of being to myself. So I explored that in a great level of depth, and then looked at kind of gangsters and their fathers, and also people in the public eye and their fathers, and I kind of explored that in more detail, and that was quite interesting to me. I read about sort of and met with sort of criminals that, and usually what you find is they have a masculine figure within their family or around their kind of people from a very young age that is very inspiring, somebody they want to be like, you know. So like whether that be a father or whether that be an uncle or whether that be a friend of the family. So I was just doing a lot of research like that, and then obviously trying to get the physicality and the voice, and just figuring out who this guy was, and yeah, it was a lot of fun.
And kind of as a jumping off from that, another fan question we had was, and you can all answer this, what was your favorite scene to film or take part in, and equally, what was the most challenging part of the show to shoot on Gangs of London? Gareth, why don't you start?
Most challenging, probably the campsite sequence in the end of Ep 2, because we were shooting that in the middle of a field in Kent that Matt Gant, our production designer, had amazingly turned into this big traveler site community. But obviously the location where it was, and this was just coming up to December, I think it was probably like, it was probably the first 2 weeks of December, if not the last week of November. So it was right in the midst of the winter, and we were shooting through the night, and that whole location was kind of almost like a wind tunnel. So the entire way through, it was just blisteringly cold. And I think day one was the day that first night of the shoot was the first night that I realized I didn't have adequate footwear for the shoot.
Yeah, why did you come in your slippers that day, Gareth?
You know me, Joe. I thought I'd be in the hotel room, you know, sipping cocktails and watching the live feed of the monitor. But no, apparently I had to be there. But we were, you know, it was one of those things where it was freezing cold. The whole environment was really, really cold. The mud was getting bigger and higher and heavier every single day, and you know, we were doing lots of pyrotechnics. We were doing burn stunts. We were doing guys riding motorbikes through that mud, being pulled off on a bungee rope, you know, and being shot with shotguns, all this sort of crazy nonsense. And then you know, Joe got to shoot a couple of rounds as well, which was good fun. You said before that was our day one, wasn't it? Of working together on this show. That was day one. So it was a challenging first day, shooting guns throughout the night for a couple of nights. And we, you know, it was a heavy going scene. We didn't have a whole lot of time to shoot it. And so we had to be very kind of creative in terms of obviously my first AD, Liam, had scheduled it. So it was very kind of like creatively scheduled in order to make sure that we could maximize our time, whether it was, you know, splitting teams up into the camp, into the caravan, there was an interior set, or the stuff on the ground then when we did all the stunt work as well. But that was probably the most sort of difficult thing for me across the entire show. And
Sope, what about you? What was the most challenging or fun, or both, scene to film?
I suppose one of the most challenging scenes for sure for me comes a lot later in the series, so I'll try not to spoil anything. But there's a sequence of scenes that we shot as one big block and then was cut up in the editing room, but where Elliot is being interrogated by people that we meet for the first time. And for those of us who have seen that scene, you could understand why it was challenging to shoot. But I just remember having to really put myself in a certain frame of mind in order to get the most out of it. And I'm quite proud of that sequence because of how much I know I put myself through. There were moments that were quite dangerous, and that was one of those sequences that I felt like, you know what, I kind of just have to go through this and make it as real as possible for Sope, the actor, in order to get the truth for Elliot, the character in that scene. So that was really hard, but we got through it, and it looks really good. I still get some texts today being like, oh my God, that scene, like, are you okay? You know, you can get like psychological damage from putting yourself through that. And I was like, thankfully, I'm really okay. So yeah, that would be probably my most challenging sequence of the series.
And Joe?
Ep 6 was kind of, I thought was quite relatively challenging because you know, we're not relying on Gareth's amazing action and flashes and bangs and what have you. It's literally just people in a house and sort of looks and quiet discussions and things like that. And that was probably for me a little bit more difficult, you know, just to get the kind of nuance of the relationships between the brother and myself and my mum and that sort of that triangle and then Elliot when he comes into it. So yeah, I thought that was probably a more tricky one.
And Gangs of London, it does deal with a lot of dark themes, but it also does have a sense of humor, which is something I really like about the show, and I know a lot of the fans do as well. For example, in episode 1, Elliot's line about "I had a dart" is fantastic when he's talking about how he took out, I think, like 8 guys in the pub brawl. Gareth, was that something that you were keen on pushing, that sense of humor? And Joe and Sope, was that something that appealed to you about the show?
We always wanted levity in there because we knew that we were dealing with pretty dark subject matter, and you know, you've got to have those little moments, those little things that break the tension. But I think I'm not going to take credit for that line. I'm almost certain, and Shopes, you can kind of clear this up for me, because I don't remember writing that line, and so I'm pretty sure it was one of those instances where you kind of riffed on stuff, and we had about maybe 3 or 4 different versions of it that you came up with, or something or other. Is that how it went down? I'm pretty sure that's what it was.
We had lots of different versions, and I would love to take credit for the line, but when I watched it, I was just like, "Oh, that was really funny. That was really good." Did I come up with that? I want to say that I did, and then I went back to the script, and it is there.
But is it there?
Yeah.
No one wants to take credit for this amazing moment.
Yeah, it was probably Matt then. We give it to credit to Matt then.
Yeah, yeah, Matt is good. But yeah, I was desperate to take credit for it. I can't lie to you. But I bowed down to you and Matt's genius completely.
Yeah.
And again, in terms of challenges during the Gangs of London shoot, one fan was asking for you, Gareth, how hard it was to shoot the 5th episode, which was, of course, the epic siege that you directed.
Yeah, that one easy. That was tricky. It was one of those ones where, Christ, I mean, if we were doing a film, we'd have had a lot of days for a sequence like that. And obviously on a television budget and television schedule, you get a lot less. We still had a healthy amount of days to shoot that sequence out. But it was certainly not easy. We had about 3 units running some days. So we'd have like, you know, a splinter unit down there shooting the sort of the mercenaries lining up outside the house to put the C4 on the door. We would be up in a loft set shooting Mal going crazy with his machine gun, killing everybody, killing Andy and Craig. And so, you know, we did that sequence. It was just manic. I had like 3 monitors in front of me and then a laptop next to me. So we'd be watching 3 takes run simultaneously, telling the 2nd unit and the 3rd unit if they were good to go on to the next shot, cutting the footage in because we edit the action sequences on set live. So it was intense, and it was, you know, there was a lot going on in that episode in terms of the action set piece, let alone the actual drama leading up to it. So yeah, I think everyone kind of brought their A game to that, and thankfully, you know, it all kind of slotted into place. So whether it was the SFX or the armorers or the art department, and then the makeup and wardrobe teams were kind of, you know, jumping in every single shot and having to change this, change that, add 15 bullet holes to somebody's back because I don't do anything in small measures. It was an endurance, but it was great. Very proud of it.
Yeah, absolutely, totally paid off. Now, Gangs of London has an incredible ensemble cast, which means that there's so many fascinating dynamics and relationships throughout the show. But for each of you, what was a dynamic that you found particularly interesting or that you enjoyed exploring between 2 characters? Joe, why don't you start?
I thought, I mean, there's a few. There are a few. I actually thought there were some interesting moments with Sean and Elliot as the series went on, which I thought were a bit I wasn't expecting them. And there were some cool moments, and I started to regard Elliot in a different way, which I hadn't planned to do. And I think that's kind of credit to Sope's performance as well, because you just sort of you feel it out on the day a little bit, and how I work anyway. I don't like to have preconceptions of how I'm gonna be or what exactly I'm gonna do, and I like to kind of respond to what the other actor's giving me, and in Sope's case, I was starting to warm to his character more and more, and I think that's testament to his performance. Aside from that, I'd say the relationship with my brother, played by Brian Burnell, I thought Brian just brought something so kind of so much depth and so much kind of emotion to that character, and he's here and there. He comes up little scenes here and there, and I really felt a connection to him. And I've known Brian for many years. Did my first film with him, Offender, and he had a small role in that, and it was great to kind of to riff off him with some of those moments, because I think in the show the relationship between Billy and Sean is so vital, and it's kind of something that I really related to, having 4 brothers myself. So yeah.
Sope, what about you?
I really love working with Joe, and I hope that's clear on screen. We knew each other a little bit before, but like we never worked together, and our paths hadn't crossed properly. So to work with him on this was a real blessing, and I'm glad that we've got like a good chemistry, because it meant that we did good work. Aside from working with Joe, I really love working with Pippa Bennett Warner, who plays Shannon. And I think that the relationship between Elliot and Shannon is, I think, Gareth, you described it to me once as the heartbeat of the show. Like this star-crossed lovers that we want to work out. We want there to be this hope for their relationship going forward. And I've spoken with Pippa so much, like before, during, and after the project, about how we were going to achieve that. And we've received so much like goodwill, and like people telling us that relationship was so important to them to see. So I'm really hoping that connection, well, we'll see what happens with that. But actually my favorite relationships in the series, I wasn't a part of at all. I think my 2 favorite relationships in the series are between Nargis Rashidi and Axel, who play Lala and Heka, and also Orly Shulka, who plays
Luan,
and his wife. I think both of those relationships are so very different, but they're so nuanced as well, and they're just really beautiful to watch. I think one of the strengths of Gangs of London as a series is how diverse it is. And one of the reasons I think it appeals so much is because it represents London as it actually is, one of the most cosmopolitan cities in the world. And there is something for everybody in terms of the education on different cultures and different languages. We've spoken before about how wonderful it is to see people speaking in their own languages, and us having access to that via the subtitles. Because I think, I can't lie to you, as a black man now, it'd be remiss of me not to speak on the events that happen in the world and how difficult a time we're going through. But I think that one of the greatest ways to overcome racism and structural inequality is education. And I feel that, like, I'm not going to sit here on a box and pontificate and tell that Gangs of London is the way that we're going to cure the ills of the world. But I think showing the truth of the world and like people's different cultures and where they're coming from, and humanizing people, you know, making sure that we realize that people aren't beneath us or above us or too different from us. I think that showing different cultures on TV and showing an equality in that forum is really important. And I think that's one of my favorite parts of being a part of this project. because we were going to represent London the way it is, not the way it's been seen before. We were going to speak people's languages and show what it's like to be in a house that's not our own. So those two relationships were really important for me, because I learned something. I learned something about Kurdish people. I learned something about Albanians. And I learned that they're human beings, not too different from myself.
Yeah. Gangs of London, it does have this incredible diverse cast. And when RadioTimes.com started advertising this Q&A and asking for fan questions, we saw so much praise for the show's cast. I mean, Gareth, could you just talk a little bit about how you went about assembling this cast and casting some of the key roles?
Well, I got to give huge credit to Kelly Van Henry, who was the casting director of the show. Because I know myself and Matt, I mean, we were coming into this project only having really experienced our work outside in Indonesia and doing one film in the UK. So this was sort of like a whole different ball game to us. And so, you know, she guided us through the process, and she kind of helped us by putting people in front of us that, you know, that would be able to speak authentically to the cultures that they would be playing. And that became one of the remits of the show. We discussed it together and we talked about it, and we were like, this is important to us, because, you know, like Sope said far more eloquently than I'll ever be able to say it earlier. We wanted to be able to feel like there was an element of the show that felt authentic, that felt real, that we didn't want to have everyone suddenly just speaking in English all the time. We wanted people to be able to speak within their mother tongue, and that was important to us. And so, you know, and so that was part of the process, really, and massive tip of the hat to Kelly for, you know, introducing us to so many incredible, talented actors, you know, some of which came in from, you know, different countries in order to be part of the show, in order to be part of this world that we were creating. So yeah, it was a huge experience and huge undertaking on her part as well, and her team.
Mm. The portrayal of London in the series actually is interesting, because it does feel very authentic and multicultural, as we were saying, but there is also a slightly operatic, almost kind of Gotham City vibe to it. How did you kind of land on that and the way in which the show portrays London?
Well, I think, like me and Matt, we both kind of took a look at the idea of early on, we knew that the action components were going to be a major part of the DNA of the show. It was always important to us that we would have these opportunities to do sort of wild action sequences. And so in order to do that, we had to make a very early call on the tone of the show. And one of the things we decided is that we were like, well, this can't be a show that is at one time a crazy all-out action sequence, but then also become like a social commentary. Do you know what I mean? So we knew we weren't going for a completely grounded in reality approach, because if you do that, to be honest, the action wouldn't belong in that show. It would undermine the message if there was going to be a message that was going to run through it. And so for us, we kind of took a look at the idea of the world build has to feel a bit more larger than life. It has to feel a bit more Gothamized. There's obviously the terminology that we've all kind of used when we were pitching the show. But it was this idea to create something that felt a little bit mythic and a little bit more operatic, in order for us to be able to justify the bigger, wilder components that made up the show as well. And so that was kind of the influence and why we went in that direction with it.
And Sope and Joe, the show does have this larger than life quality, and as we've talked about already, the spectacular action sequences, but it really does explore the psychological impact as well that living in this world has on these characters. Was that something that jumped out at you when you read the script, and again, something that appealed to you about Gangs of London?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the psychological element is what drives Sean. You know, his upbringing. He's had a particularly difficult and quite uncompromising upbringing. I think he suffers from a certain level of PTSD from it, probably, and you know, sort of playing a character that is slightly sort of vulnerable in that way was very interesting to me, because he's an intelligent guy, but he's also he's suffered, and he's having the rug pulled from under him at every moment when he's finding out who his dad really was, and perhaps part of his life before was a lie. So for me, playing these kind of characters that aren't completely one-dimensional and have more to them and have substance and have layers and it's not black or white with this particular character, there are grey areas. For me, is what it's all about as an actor, and continue to kind of look for roles like that.
And Sope, what about you? Because Elliot is interesting because he very much has that inner conflict, doesn't he? He has divided loyalties.
Absolutely. I don't know. Yes, that duality of his person. In the research that I did on, it's hard not to say anything that's a spoiler for people who haven't seen it yet.
I think we're probably okay to talk about things that happen in the first couple of episodes. Obviously, there
are loads of people who, especially in Latin America, I can see loads of comments from them who haven't seen any of it yet. So
maybe let's tread carefully.
But I'll say that I did a lot of research into characters like Elliot and learned about how difficult it is to keep your mind in one place and how not to create a split personality almost. And that was an interesting sort of battle that he had to navigate over the course of the series, as I'm sure many of us know, and some people are about to find out, about where his loyalties lie and how that dissonance can affect one's mental health. Was a really interesting sort of arc to try and plot through the series. And I think that he gets lost in it himself. So that makes playing someone who's lost in themselves even more tricky. So it was hard work, but it was work that I sort of relished. And I really hope that I did justice to people in his position.
Yeah. Very well put. Very nicely put. Gareth, crime drama and the world of gangsters, I mean, traditionally, perhaps stereotypically, can be portrayed as quite male-dominated on screen. But again, when RadioTimes.com started advertising this Q&A and asking for fan questions, we had a lot of questions about Marion Wallace. People really responded to that character. Was it important to you that the female characters were an incredibly significant part of this world of Gangs of London?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I mean, we were always, looking for ways to sort of to push and pull at what's expected within this genre. There's, you go off and create a show called Gangs of London. There's an awful lot of preconceived conceptions of what you're going to do with it. And a lot of people were probably expecting a lot of sort of, white Cockney gangsters walking around in trench coats with clubs, beating each other on the head in London and boozers. And we only spent one episode in a boozer, so thank God for that. But it was good to kind of like to subvert those expectations and to find a group of characters that could be, equally strong and equally as fierce and equally as driven to succeed in this world, regardless of whether they were male or female. And I think with when it comes to Marion Wallace, played amazingly by Michelle Fairley, we landed on our feet with her because she's such an incredible performer, and she's so smart too in terms of you come to set and you workshop. See, every time we're shooting on set, like we'll sit down and we'll workshop the scene first before we shoot anything. Obviously, we sit down and discuss the script and discuss anything that people are having little issues with, any bits of dialogue that's bumping or whatever. And she was just so given throughout the entire process. And, I'm sure that goes the same for all of the other actors who were involved in the show as well. I mean, she was such a given performer. But, not just with Michelle, but also with Narges, who plays Lala. What a fierce performance. And it was great. And it was a real good opportunity for us to be able to give her, in the beginning of episode 3, for example, a real baptism of fire and kind of like, and put her through this blistering set piece, which, to be quite frank, we had, I know with Sope, we had about 3 or 4 days to shoot some of his sequences. And then we were doing the campsite for 4 or 5 days of that. And, that's tricky and difficult. For her sequence, we had like 1 day. We had 1 day for her to go through, blitz through like 15 different people with an AK-47 and then go and grieve her dead husband in the other room. So, it was a testament to her energy and her performance and her commitment to this project as well, that we got through that sequence in such a ridiculously short amount of time. So, but it was important. It was important to kind of do that, and you know, for it to not just be about like, okay, creating strong roles. It could be for female actors, but also for it to be culturally diverse, for it to speak to lots of different people, you know, and lots of different backgrounds. So that was definitely something that was important to us right from the get-go.
Well, this next question from a fan is an interesting one. So Gangs of London has actually been compared, and this may surprise you, it's a slightly surprising comparison, but it has been compared in some quarters to another Sky Atlantic show, Game of Thrones. Now, you might think that that's crazy, where are the dragons? But obviously, I guess if you think about it, there are themes of feuding families, there are politics of power. I mean, does that comparison surprise you guys? Do you see any similarities between the two shows?
I mean, I do. I think there are, you know, I've only seen a little bit of Game of Thrones, so I'm going more on just what the vibe, what I hear. But certainly, kind of, you know, these sort of battle for power and sort of and kind of and the way that is upset and the way that changes as we move through the show, I think, and also just the sort of the scale of it. You know, I mean, Game of Thrones is massive scale, huge sort of epic action pieces, and we've tried to do some stuff like that in this, you know, with the end of episode 4 and episode 5, and I mean, there's loads, and the shot-based fighting sequences. I mean, you know, we're trying to, and the stuff at the end of episode 8, we're trying to do some stuff on a big scale, and it is kind of sensationalized, and it is a bit over the top, and kind of. But that's the style of the show. The show is kind of almost has a kind of a big budget kind of action, you know, American superhero blockbuster quality to it, you know, at moments. And I thought that was quite cool. You got a mix of the Asian cinema from Gareth mixed with this kind of, I don't know, this blockbuster American sort of type drama on the kind of gritty streets of London, and for me that was a great draw for wanting to be involved. We're trying to do something different and trying to do something new and something fresh and not tread the same old ground, and I think we've done that, hopefully.
I think so. And
now that you said it, oh sorry, Morgan.
No, carry on.
I said it, like, I'm just trying to break down all of the comparisons in my head, and I think like Game of Thrones starts with the death of Robert Baratheon, right? And then there's like the ascent to power, and we lose Finn Wallace, and the manner in which both of those men are killed is slightly dubious, like because Baratheon's made to be drunk before he goes out hunting so that he could be removed so that Joffrey can ascend to the throne, you know. And no spoilers, no spoilers, but Finn doesn't die by accident, and somebody has orchestrated that for the purposes of somebody else taking over power. And then we see all of the 7 kingdoms, and we see, I'm not sure we have as many as 7, but we've got all of the different sort of nationalities and crime families who are vying for their own piece of the pie. And then there's a lot of politics that happens, especially with Sean making allegiance with Lala and Asif being a problem for that pair. So yeah, actually, when you say Game of Thrones, maybe Game of Thrones is just Gangs of London set in some fantastic mythical time. You know,
there you go. Like on paper, it sounds crazy, but the more you dig into it, the more it makes sense.
Yeah. I just hope that people love it for as long as they love. People love Gangs of London for as long as they love Game of Thrones, and we promise to try and not ruin the ending.
And often with the most intense TV shows, there's a lot of goofing off screen purely because you need to break the tension. And one of the fan questions we had was, what scene or behind the scenes moment made everyone start laughing on Gangs of London?
Jevon! I'll let you tell the story because you're actually on screen for it.
Oh man, what was it? So we're doing the scene at the end of episode 7, which is like a dinner table scene, and it's a massive scene, and they're trying to cover it all in one go, and what have you. And towards the end of the scene, Michelle Fairley has to refer to Jivan, who's an important character in the show, and when she does, she calls him Jevon, and it was just a little thing. Not, you know, you would have thought nothing major, you know, but
easy mistake to make.
There it drops in the scene, and Jevon. It just like there's this silence, and then everyone bursts out laughing because no one knows who Jevon is. And we have Lucian M. Samati, kind of, he's the one who has to react to this thing, and everyone else is in the room. And Lucian is a true professional, but he's also somebody who loves a giggle. And on set, you know, when he laughs, he can't stop, and his laugh is infectious, and it sort of sets everybody else off. So every time we got to this line, because it happened a few times where he was called Jevon, not Jeevan, we'd all just laugh, and it became very difficult to sort of continue shooting. So there was always moments like that as we moved through.
So for people who haven't seen episode 7 yet, like, this is a really important climax because 2 of the most important families of the series are here having a conversation about whether or not they're going to be able to move forward together, like what's happened in the past. This can either make or break their union. And so at the heightened moment, like when that drops, like, everyone's like leaning in geared, and you just hear Jevon is like, no, I can't continue with this anymore. So yeah, that memory will always make me smile for sure.
I won't be able to watch that scene back in the same way now. It's always the quite intense ones, isn't it? Lucian, I never would have thought of him as a giggler, but there you go.
Lucian set me up on the first episode. It was probably my first day of filming with Lucian as well. We were shooting the scene when at the end of episode 1, when he takes Jack out with the razor blade and the cup of tea, and it's a very, like, you know, cold and calculated scene. It's like you could hear a pin drop on set, and you know, at the end of the take, Lucian sort of like gets up out of his chair, puts the chair and back under the table where he got it from, picks up the coffee and the tea, and then walks off back to the kitchen. That was the end of the shot. That was the end of the scene. And then on one of the takes, you know, we're rolling, and then he gets up and he goes to move the chair, and then he stops, and then he sat back down, and then he started talking to Jack, and starts, like, you know, talking about like goats and sheep in some far off country, and I'm sat there being total pretentious wanker director, just like at the monitor thinking, this could be gold, don't hold that, let it run out. And basically after about a minute and a half of him just waffling on about sheep, and I'm thinking, it might still be good. It might still be good. Suddenly, Lucian just bursts into tears, can't stop laughing. And the whole reason is that somebody from the album, they put little tape down on the floor where the chair was, and it got stuck to the floor. So he couldn't lift the chair up off the floor. So he thought, I'll just sit back down and talk about sheep. And, you know, me being Welsh, I was like obliging him. So, you know.
Oh, amazing. And just finally, guys, before we wrap up, we here at RadioTimes.com, we opened up the floodgates to questions from Gangs of London fans. And of course, by far the most popular question was, will there be a season 2? What's going to happen in season 2? I mean, what can you say at this stage? How much are you allowed to say about a season 2?
I can say that if loads of people are asking for it, it means that they like season 1, and we're really happy about that. That's about as much as I can say.
Yeah, I mean, like, look, I mean, it's one of those things where we've been sort of still in the throes of enjoying the response to it and enjoying the reaction to the first one. Like I said at the top of this, it took us 3 years to get this one, you know, designed and done and out. And so it's just been a bit sort of and also we're in weird, unprecedented times at the moment, you know, both on a global scale and on many other levels, actually. And so, you know, it's something that we're very, like, heartened by, to hear that there's a hunger for it, that there's a desire for it, and who knows, just watch the space, really.
Mm. Maybe it'll be like another thing like Game of Thrones. We'll have 8 seasons of Gangs of London. I know I definitely watch every single episode. Well, unfortunately, that is.
You might have dragons then.
Maybe you can have dragons. Yeah, jump the dragon. maybe in season 3. Unfortunately, that is all we've got time for tonight. But Sope, Joe, Gareth, thank you so much for joining us here at radiotimes.com.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And don't forget, for all you watching, you can watch all 9 episodes of Gangs of London now on Sky box sets, or tune in for episode 8 tonight at 9 p.m. on Sky Atlantic, with episode 9, the finale, following next week. Thank you all very much for tuning in.